Oh, Sega. Every other year, and you seem to be releasing a new Genesis collection. No, I mean, seriously. Now that the Xbox One and PlayStation 4 have a Genesis collection, the question is, which version do you get? Well, more specifically, we're not really going to look at the new releases. We're going to look at the at-games SEGA Genesis HD console, and we're going to look at the PlayStation 3 Genesis collection. I mean, seriously, if you really do want to play Genesis games, there are about a million ways for you to do so. I mean, even the Wii got in on the action on the Virtual Console. I mean, look at how many games that Sega released on the Wii Virtual Console. But just for argument's sake, we're going to look at one of the more expensive ways to play Genesis games, and perhaps one of the cheapest ways to play Genesis games. Okay, so AtGames is not unfamiliar with making Genesis products. They've been making versions of the SEGA Genesis Flashback for years. But up until last year, AtGames is only releasing standard definition consoles for the SEGA Genesis. But with everything pushing hard towards HD and Nintendo releasing the Classic Edition NES and Super NES, AtGames took the step forward and released an HD console. Retailing for about $60 or $70, the price of this isn't too bad, but it is the more expensive way to play Genesis games. But what does it have to offer that the PlayStation 3 version doesn't? Or any of the other collections? Well, first and foremost, hardware. Okay, so it's software, but it is running on emulation. Let's be clear about this. This is an emulated machine. But the ability to use and play original Genesis games via the cartridge slot at the top of the machine is a major plus for this machine, because that does mean you can expand the library beyond the games that are already installed on it. Which, speaking of, this has about 66 games installed on it that are official SEGA Genesis or Game Gear or Sega Master System games, and we will get to that in just a moment. Even though the box does advertise 85 games, there are 19 games on this system that are homebrew games, and they really are not worth playing. So let's just take a look a little bit at what's actually on this machine. So the machine does come with 66 games installed on it. Somewhere around 45, 46 of them, give or take, are actual Genesis games. And they do range from the Sonic games, to the Phantasy Star games, to the Shining Force games. There's a really good list of games on this machine. Now again, this is a console, so it does plug directly into your TV. It is HD, so it plugs in via a HDMI cable. And it uses external controllers, which just, well, they mimic the 6-button SEGA Genesis controllers. These are 100% Wi-Fi, though they are not Bluetooth. However, they do get the job done, and they get them done very, very well. But Metal Geek, again, how is this really worth purchasing this for about $70 versus getting, well, the PlayStation 3 collection, as you would say? Well, the PlayStation 3 collection, which is basically Sonic's ultimate SEGA Genesis collection, because, you know, Sonic is the mascot, so they're really going to exploit having Sonic on the cover. I mean, yeah, of course, obviously the biggest difference is that this is a Blu-ray disc, and everything is emulated off the disc. But where this costs about $60 or $70, this will run you about $10 to $15. And this comes jam-packed with a lot of games on the disc as well. I mean, like about 45 to 50 games, give or take. But here is where things are a little different. Where the AtGames SEGA Genesis HD Flashback will run games at 720p at full HD, so will the PlayStation 3 version. But if you take a look here, the Flashback, well, you'll notice that it runs it in the original aspect ratio. So basically there are black bars on the side because, again, it's running at the original aspect ratio. With the PlayStation 3 version, it's also running it at the original aspect ratio, but it adds borders. And while this may not seem like a big deal and some people might love those borders, I'm not a fan of having flashy graphics on the sides filling in for the black borders because to me it's kind of distracting. And here on the PlayStation 3, you can't remove those borders. But Metal Geek, on the PlayStation 3 version, you can change the aspect ratio so that you don't have borders on the side at all. Yeah, but then the game looks warped, stretched, and it just plain ugly. To me, playing a Genesis game needs to be played in its original aspect ratio. Or if it is going to be stretched to widescreen, it needs to be done so that it looks really good. Here on the PlayStation 3 version, it doesn't. And the borders are very, very distracting for me, personally. The at-game SEGA Genesis Flashback HD already has a point up because it's playing the games in 720p just like the PlayStation 3 version, but it doesn't have those annoying borders. I mean, seriously, was it really that hard to give the option to the player on the PlayStation 3 disc to remove the borders? I mean, was it really that hard? Now, the PlayStation 3 version, as you would expect, does have some filters, such as if you want to smooth the graphics out so the characters look less shaggy and the graphics are a little bit smoother looking, you can do that. But it tends to make the game look very muddy, and it doesn't really look that good at all. So I really just don't use that filter like at all. I pretty much just play the games in their original form. Over on the at-game side of things, you could use a scan filter, but I tend to play the games in their default settings. Now besides that, everything pretty much plays the same except for when you're playing it on the PlayStation 3, of course you're using a PlayStation controller, where on the at-games HD Flashback, you are playing either with the box controller, which is based on the 6-button SEGA Genesis controller, or you're plugging in original Genesis controllers and playing that way. So there is a bit more of an authentic feel playing it on the at-games HD console. But the games otherwise pretty much play the same, and they play very, very well. So what it really comes down to now is game selection. Now both of these have games that the others don't. It really kind of depends on what you're looking for. Right off the bat, the HD Flashback is an RPG lover's heaven. This little console comes jam-packed with 10 RPGs installed on it. But the PlayStation 3 disc, it's no slouch either. It has the entire Shining Force series that was released on Genesis. It has Beyond Oasis, which is not on the at-games Flashback system, so that's a big plus. And it even comes with the Phantasy Star series, though, again, this is where the HD Flashback over on at-game side of things has a one-up on the PlayStation 3 disc. And that is the at-games Flashback HD. Is that it comes with the entire Phantasy Star series installed on the system, where the PlayStation 3 doesn't. Well, it does and it doesn't, and I'll explain that in a second. On the Flashback system, Phantasy Star 1, 2, 3, and 4 are all installed on the machine and ready to play. Now, Phantasy Star 1, as you know, is a Master System game, not a Genesis game. But the Flashback does actually have Master System games installed on it. And Phantasy Star 1 is one of them. The PlayStation 3 disc, on the other hand, only has Phantasy Star 2, 3, and 4 installed on it. And that's because those were originally Genesis games, where again, Phantasy Star 1 was a Master System game. Now here's the deal. You can get Phantasy Star 1 on the PlayStation 3 disc. The only problem is that it's an unlockable game. In other words, you can unlock the game by performing certain things in certain games, and that's kind of true of a lot of things. The PlayStation 3 has a lot of extras. Either you can get additional games or interviews with the creators and stuff like that by playing the games that are on the disc and achieving certain goals, so to speak. And in order to play Phantasy Star 1, you have to achieve one of these goals in one of the games. Which means Phantasy Star 1 is not playable right from the start, and that is a little annoying. I know that in this day and age of gaming, earning things like trophies or unlockables is kind of the way of the future and kind of keeping people interested in gaming, but this is such an oversight that it's a little annoying. Having Phantasy Star 1 playable on the at-game SEGA Genesis Flashback HD right from the start, that's what a gamer really wants. Now, don't get me wrong, if you are a gamer who really likes to play and unlock all those unlockables and earn different things, that is cool. There is definitely an audience for that in today's gaming culture. But for me, who just wants to play the series all the way through without having to do a bunch of extra stuff to get it, I'm just thinking, why not have made that immediately playable on the disc? But again, that is just me. I don't mind earning unlockables and trophies and all that stuff, but here, it's kind of holding one of the games in one of my favorite RPG series of all time hostage until I basically go through and do this specific goal to unlock the game, and that to me is just a little annoying. And even with that though, this PlayStation 3 disc is really amazing. I mean, you do have Shining Force 2, Shining in the Darkness, Phantasy Star 2, Phantasy Star 3, Phantasy Star 4, Beyond Oasis. There's a lot of great RPGs on this disc, and I know I'm focusing a lot on RPGs is because I'm a really big RPG fan, but you also get the Golden Axe series. You also get the Sonic the Hedgehog series. You get Vector Man 1 and 2. You get Comic Zone. There's so much on this disc that is just awesome. And what this does have, what this PlayStation 3 disc has that the HD Flashback does not, is the Streets of Rage series. Now, come on, Act Games, really? Really? You couldn't put Streets of Rage 1, 2, and 3 on your HD system, even though you've included them in your standard definition consoles for years? But I digress, because again, the cartridge slot will allow me to play Streets of Rage 1, 2, and 3 on the Flashback system because I could just pop the cartridges in and play. But seriously, why didn't they include those games on the Flashback? They are very important and very popular games. And Beyond Oasis, where's Beyond Oasis? You have 10 RPGs on this machine and you didn't include Beyond Oasis? Oh well, at least you did give us Sword of a Million. And the PlayStation 3 disc does not have Sword of a Million. And you do have Defenders of Oasis, which is a really good Game Gear RPG. So as you can see, the game selections are a bit different from each other, but a lot of the Genesis games that are on the Flashback are also on the PlayStation 3 disc. Because of licensing issues, the Flashback does not have Sonic the Hedgehog 3 on it. Basically, from what I can tell, there are licensing issues with Sonic the Hedgehog 3, so a lot of collections don't include it anymore. Thankfully, the PlayStation 3 disc does have it on there. I would imagine that the reason why Sonic the Hedgehog 3 made it onto this disc is because they put it on there before the licensing issues really became an issue. Okay, so there are a ton of collections out there, but between these two, the PlayStation 3 disc and the at-game SEGA Genesis Flashback HD, which one do you choose? Well, I'm gonna have to go with the HD Flashback. I know. Some people think Act Games consoles are terrible and that they all don't work and that the sound is terrible, but this HD Flashback is actually a really good little machine. Now there is the nostalgia factor. I do love the fact that it looks like a Model 1 SEGA Genesis. I like being able to plug in cartridges if I want to play games that aren't included on the machine. And it doesn't have those really annoying borders on the games. But the PlayStation 3 version is no slouch. I choose the HD Flashback just because there's a little bit more going for it than the PlayStation 3 disc. But the PlayStation 3 disc is only about 10 bucks, maybe 15, so if you can, why not just buy both? This is a Metal Geek saying, have a great one.